Hello, and welcome to the ADHD Interrupted podcast, where we help you really understand what's going on in that neurosparkly brain with practical tools, expert insights, and plenty of those, now it all makes sense moments that we all definitely need on this journey. I'm so excited about today's guest. Joining us today is former teacher and SEN specialist, now ADHD nutritionist, Will Martin. Will's work is invaluable in this space. His fascinating background, his wealth of knowledge, and his sheer passion for his mission stayed with me for long after this conversation. I'm so glad I got to pick his brain on your behalf. In this episode, we get into ADHD beyond the behaviour, my favourite subject, the gut and brain connection, ADHD nutrition, regulation, and why supporting an ADHD child means looking at the whole picture. Oh, and can a good probiotic work as well as Ritalin? Let's find out. Quick ADHD hack before we start. If you're always forgetting to take your vitamins, make them so delicious that the only problem is perhaps taking too many. Huge thank you to our sponsors, Proven Vitamins, for believing in our mission and helping us support you. Welcome, Will Martin, to the ADHD Interrupted podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. I've really been looking forward to this.
Thank you for having me.
When did you discover you were neurodivergent, and was there any pivotal or light bulb moments for you?
Yeah, I think about it a lot, really. I think it started for me when I was at school. I found school really hard. Everything felt a challenge, particularly in terms of the academics. The sporting side of things I thrived and found really easy. I could kind of pick up different types of sports, which is kind of the case for many families of support. There's usually an outlet, whether that is an academic subject or whatever it may be. They're really strong at a particular subject. But for me, I found, lots of the academics really tricky, and I just thought that was something I just had to work through. So that's sort of where it started. And then I kind of developed into like low self-confidence, and really kind of overthinking things and not wanting to read in front of the class, kind of fear for mispronouncing words, the disconnect between having thoughts in your brain and then being able to say it in a fluent way has always been a big trigger for me. Even now, I have to really cautiously think. It's got better over time, but that's sort of embedded from that school experience, I suppose. And then I understood why that was. When I went to university, I realized that I was diagnosed dyslexic, which was useful. I got extra time, I got support, and that was amazing. But still, it didn't answer the questions or the things that I was looking for or searching for. My 20s were a bit of a car crash in terms of like mental health, spirals of depression, anxiety, kind of just feeling really all over the shop. And I was like, surely this isn't just down to dyslexia or just down to this one thing. So I started to explore it a little bit more. And I think one of the clues is I was always reading self-help books, always trying to find like what's the optimal way to do things, like give me some help, please. And then so I knew I was dyslexic, and then it ran through my family, and I realized that probably 2-3 years ago. And then that's when I started to explore it a little bit more. And then I got diagnosed.
Books.
Yeah, exactly. And you read the books and you're like, yes, that's me. And obviously, I realized it genetically, which I'm sure we'll discuss later. And then, I went through the diagnostic process, and I was diagnosed ADHD and autistic. And at that point, I looked back through a completely different lens, and everything started to make so much more sense.
How was that journey for you when getting diagnosed? Because a lot of people, it's not the big relief that people think it's going to be, is it? It can be quite confronting and quite difficult to get through sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And everybody's journey is completely individualized. It's completely different. But you're right. There's almost different stages, isn't there? There's like, firstly, I suppose sometimes the shock, or, I'd never actually thought, could it be autism as well? I think, from a naive point of view, like my understanding of it, even, as an ex-teacher as well of ADHD and autism was still, through no fault of my own, just through the awareness was lacking. And it was through that journey I really actually understood, like, okay, this is what this means. This is why I experienced this in a certain way. This is why I've had this has happened in my life in this certain way. And you're not trying to like kind of find, I suppose, like the answer to all of these things. It's more like you just have more compassion. That's the biggest thing I've learned through all of this. So you go through many different stages.
Yeah, it's funny
for sure.
Shock, because I always relate it to grief. A lot of people do. Yes. So grief and relief, isn't it? And the stages of grief, you have like shock first, don't you? And then it's denial. I know some people that I've spoke to, they've questioned themselves and thought they've gaslighted their doctor. And then it's like anger. I know I felt angry with the system and things, not now, but you just go through all those stages. But at least with this kind of grief, there is relief at the end. It's interesting you say about being a teacher. So would you say like in that system itself there was a lack of awareness?
I think it really depends upon the school and the experience there's some amazing teachers out there and some amazing leaders and some amazing schools doing some amazing things. This isn't about going on teachers. It's about kind of an awareness and an understanding of it. I knew I had dyslexia and I knew I was sort of neurodiverse. I knew kind of ways in which to support children, but it was just almost like you're almost given like this impossible task, right? To help, a class of 30 children,
Yeah.
with all these different individual needs, yet you're trying to push through a curriculum which fits probably for about 10% of those children in that class. And in your heart, it's wrong. Like, at the start, I was in it really kind of energized by it all, really excited. And yeah, like I was working in a primary school and you made a real difference. But ultimately, there was so many things I wanted to do, but you were just kind of going up against a system which, at the current moment in time, still is just not in a position in which it supports all learners. It was hard at times for sure. Yeah. And it's, I think teachers are amazing, but ultimately, I suppose the structure and the confinement in which they've got to work within is just incredibly challenging.
So do you think the ADHD medical model is broken? And what do you think needs to change?
If it's not broken, it's very close to breaking. And again, it's like the education system. It's no fault of the people in it or, the people who have dedicated their careers to it. I think it's just so unbelievably overwhelmed. And if something's so unbelievably overwhelmed, how can it cope and how can it ultimately serve what it needs to serve in terms of, if we're looking at the medical model in terms of ADHD and autism? Because ultimately, the story I've heard from many people who I support, whether they've got an ADHD diagnosis or not, ones who are waiting, the waiting list, as you'll know, they're, can be years and years and years long, and the support they need it now. And then those who have been diagnosed, usually the next steps are, you've been diagnosed, here's your report, we can offer medication. Like that's sort of the conversation sort of finishes there. And what I would like to see, and it is happening in certain pockets, but again, it's, these things take time to roll out. And I really hope it does, because it's obviously, it's about awareness and about funding and about support. But ultimately, we need a more of a whole body approach, ones which looks at nutrition, ones that looks at lifestyle, looks at genetics, looks at supporting the nervous system, looks at the body as a whole, that real sort of whole body approach. And then, use medication where helpful, and that medication is absolutely vital. I'm completely here for medication, but it's like, are there any other things we can look to question during that time? Like, can we can we support the medication effectiveness? Can we reduce the side effects? Are there other things we can look at, maybe downstream in the body first before maybe opting onto that?
Yeah, I listened to something recently, and they're saying the Western world is like the only place in the world that just goes straight to medication. Like places like in Asia and things, they're very much more holistic, and they'll trial that offer other things that aren't just medication.
Yeah, absolutely. There's different medical models around the world. I think, it's really interesting, this conversation, because it can be so triggering for lots of different people, in terms of, it's almost like it's not going against the medical model. It's like, how can we use the medical model we've got and look at other things which can help potentially optimize that medication, for example, or potentially, that might not be an option which we need right now for some people, So it's about, I suppose, like asking various questions, like, am I sensitive to certain foods? Am I kind of, do I feel discomfort after certain foods? Am I experiencing digestive issues? Like, do I kind of experience different sensitivities in different environments? Am I eating enough protein to support the production of my neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, melatonin, which I'm sure we'll talk about? What's my sleep like? All of these things can really have like an overall sort of effect. And again, everyone's individualized. There's not one thing, there's not one solution. But I think it's very much like a neuroaffirming approach, looking at the individual in front of you and having this time in order to do that is really important. But ultimately, practitioners within the model, I think, are constricted and don't necessarily have that time to be with that person and really sort of hold them through that and explore the different options.
Yeah, it's such a shame, isn't it? I think there needs to be so much more education around food. Do they do much education in food at schools now? Do you know?
I think they do some, but ultimately, the level at which they could go down, it always could be more.
Quite
and I think
controversial, though, isn't it, as well? Because, like, obviously the plant-based movement and gluten-free and whatever else, like everyone's got their own kind of version of nutrition.
Yes,
I love it. I love nutrition. I went down that rabbit hole years ago before I was diagnosed, and like you, I was buying all these self-help books, and I was just trying all these things to kind of fix something that I thought was broken. You talk a lot about nutritional imbalances, genetic influences, and environmental issues. So how can they heavily contribute to the expression of ADHD?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think it's it's important to go through maybe, yeah, each one of those
Yeah, and how do people
individually.
like identify what's affecting them as well?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think if we look at, so I suppose, genetics as a starting point, ADHD is genetic as a genetic link. It's a neurodevelopmental genetic, I don't know the word disorder, but presentation, should we call it?
Yeah, I like that. I don't hate the word
Which mean yeah, which means yes, the genes are fixed, like that's your set, I suppose, code, if you want to call it. But ultimately, the way in which they are expressed can be altered. So if we think of it in terms of, the genes are like light switches, but what's turning them on or off is kind of what's the environment in which they're bathed in. What's your sleep like? What's your stress levels like? What food are you putting in your body? What's your kind of, exposure to maybe certain toxins and everything that's under the realm of, I suppose, called like epigenetics, right? So yes, genes are fixed, but the ability in which they can be turned on or off can be changed via all of those different things. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, this would be one of the things I would put in early in terms of through the ADHD process, through diagnosis and then next steps. Right, let's map out your genetic code, not the whole of it, but like specific pathways are really useful, and I'll go into those in a moment. But ultimately, what's that looking like? Okay, right, you have a low dopamine profile, you have a high dopamine profile, you've got certain tendencies to break down B6 quicker, 30% than other people. Therefore, we could look to put that in. That could help you in terms of maybe making sure dopamine's around for longer. So it's really interesting in terms of what the genetics can actually do when you look at those. And this is something I use a lot with the clients that I support. We look at genetic testing, and it's relatively cheap. It can be done very simply with a cheek swab, so it's not that non-invasive, because I know some tests can be quite invasive and quite hard, particularly for children as well. But the one I look at is this nervous system pathway. So for example, if we take dopamine, which is a word used a lot in the ADHD community, and rightfully so, and it's that neurotransmitter, which is a signaling chemical for mood, memory, and motivation. Now, there are sort of 4 different areas within that genetic profile which is useful to know. First is the actual production of dopamine. So are we getting in the raw materials to produce enough of it? So dopamine is made from tyrosine, which is an amino acid, which is a protein. So are we getting in enough protein? And then there are other cofactors in order to make it into L-dopa, then to finally get into dopamine, such as B6, zinc, magnesium, iron. So all of those are really important to manufacture this chemical in the first place. So if we're getting that right, there's also other parts we need to look at. We also need to look at the receptors. So the specific genes for, okay, we can make it, but is the body actually like sensing it? The other thing is looking at the reuptake of it. So once we've made it and we've sensed it, it then kind of goes into this gap within the neurons. And this is our ability to feel it. Are we actually feeling it for long enough? Is it being whipped away really quickly? So therefore we've made it, we've sensed it, but actually it's gone. Like, we need more of it. That's why some people like dopamine seeking, in terms of that low dopamine profile, in terms of how that links to addictions or certain, lots of other things around sort of, having that dopamine fix is really important. Like why some people are really sort of hyperactive or can't focus on tasks, for example, and all of those other, I suppose, downstream traits of ADHD. But equally, when we know this, we can look at what things help, particularly those reuptake transporter genes. This is where certain stimulants, such as Ritalin, works on these specific genes. It's called the DAT1 gene. Actually, if we can, in some cases, giving a high dose of zinc can be as effective or kind of as supportive. It's worth trying this first in terms of the same mechanism as those specific stimulants. So I think knowing that pathway is really useful. But yeah, I mean, it can be an incredible thing to explore in terms of your genetic code and how.
What would you say the severity of your ADHD then, or your neurodivergence, can that be changed by your environment? So if you was diagnosed severe ADHD, for example, changing these things, can that bring that down?
Yes, I've seen cases where it does, and it's happened quickly, but I've equally seen cases in which it takes a little bit longer. So I think it really depends on the individual. And everyone is so individualized. Like we were saying at the start, like sometimes I'm having, I'm really struggling with, I don't know, because I'm both ADHD and autistic. Sometimes I feel like I'm having like a real ADHD day or week or month. And then it might be going into like the complete flip to that, which is the autism side. And then you've equally got in ADHD itself, like you might be a hyperactive profile or inattentive or both, or you might have some where you are one, but actually thinking you are a bit push and pull on both another. So I think it really depends. And particularly with, women as well, in terms of, this doesn't get talked about nowhere nearly enough, in terms of the cycle as well, how that massively affects hormones, how that massively affects women, and how gaslit they get when they go to potential GPs. It's just a whole other story which doesn't get talked about enough. I think it really depends on the individual, but yeah, there's so much scope to trial these things.
Yeah, it's like that saying, isn't it? Once you've met someone with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD.
Yeah, it's true.
We're siblings, we're not twins. Yeah, it's really, really interesting. It's definitely important to remember. And I think it changes with age as well.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that's an environmental thing. I think for me, it probably was, but definitely changes with age, especially with women, because obviously you get the perimenopause and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, if we talk about it, I suppose, in terms of like the environment, in terms of like the physical environment, you know, I've noticed in terms of places I've lived, and the more I understand and the more things that I know are good, like that I'm doing, which are useful for myself, such as getting out in the morning, going for a walk, getting some sunlight, you know, going for a walk, doing some stretching, getting in the sauna, just doing those. And that might not work for, and it is completely individualized, and, you know, and those things as well, you know, are separate for, well, not separate, but can be tailored particularly for men and women as well. So it's important to know. But I think it's just about trialing things and exploring things, because what will work for me, you know, might not work for you. So I'm very cautious of that when I'm helping people. You know, like I never say I've got the answers. I've got things which have helped people in the past, or like a general understanding of what, you know, might be going on a little bit deeper. But ultimately, it's about supporting someone through that process,
How
their
do you
journey.
encourage people to do movement? Because movement for me is something like, I've never been a gym bunny, but I've had to force myself to do it. And the results from movement, whether that's like a 2 mile run or a 6K, anything, it can be very small, but my focus and my symptoms are just so much better. But then I know for a lot of people that feels a bit overwhelming.
Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And it seems like you've got into like a habit of doing that, or you've seen the benefit of
Yeah,
moving,
seeing the
and
benefit.
how that and how that helps you. I'd always, with any change, I'd say start really slow, because we can have so much information and then it's like so unbelievably overwhelming. And then ultimately we feel shame and guilt, and we spiral because we haven't been able to achieve anything we might have said we wanted to do. And you know, and that is a cycle which is played out over and over and over again. But I feel like once you maybe understand the reasons why, and then you've potentially, you know, doing it through maybe yourself or supporting it through somebody else, just start uber slow. And again, movement doesn't mean necessarily running. It could literally be, right, I'm just going to sit here, watch TV and try and touch my toes. Like that could be your starting point. You know, like it could be completely stacked with something else which you know is regulating for you. Like it could be,
Thinking goes, things movement.
yeah,
I've got to go and get some gym clothes and go to the gym, and I've got to
yeah,
do this stuff. But yeah, it can be, like you say, just start. I love that slow and low, by the way. I'm taking that
oh
with me
yeah,
today.
yeah.
Such a good approach. So probiotics work as well as Ritalin. I love that. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So I suppose there's always loads of noise, isn't there, on social media, and particularly within this field and the scientific literature that's coming out. Yeah, so I talked about this the other day, and I suppose on the face of it, it does sound pretty strong, which I suppose that particular article, how it does grab, you know, your attention. But I think that the point in which they're saying is they had two different groups. They had one group which was on a nutrition plan with probiotic, and then they had another one which was on the same sort of like just a standard nutritional plan, but with a stimulant medication. And they found, obviously, this is one specific group, and you can critique, you know, studies, you know, as far as you want to go to. But what they found in this one is that both groups had the same effect on mood, memory, motivation, emotional regulation. So some ADHD traits. Now, that's to say that I suppose that there is science there to support, you know, the nutritional things that I help, you know, people with. I help, you know, in terms of looking at probiotics, in terms of supporting their gut health. So I think, and again, that might not work for anyone, and you want to be really careful in terms of putting a probiotic, because there's certain ways in which you want to do it. The specific strains, depending upon if you know more information about their genetic code, can really help. So I suppose, yeah, again, it's just another tool which can be used, if appropriate, in a really good way. You know, particularly looking at the gut and how that links with the brain and that ecosystem which it is really, for. We know our gut is our second brain, and rightly so, because it does so many things if it's working optimally, to really help us, particularly with ADHD in terms of regulating mood, regulating attention. It really helps to produce those neurotransmitters, which we discussed earlier,
Yeah.
and our immune system as well.
Yeah. Is it 90% of our serotonin is in our brain?
Yeah. Produced within our gut. Yeah, exactly.
I mean, sorry, in our gut.
Yeah, but no, you're right about that.
Yeah.
That is a perfect, because it does directly link to our brain via the vagus nerve, which is Latin for the wandering nerve. It connects directly to the brain. So if our gut is in a state of producing, if we talk about serotonin in a way in which it's optimal, and it will do that, it can help and move through the body and really help, with sleep and all of those different things, and other particular bacteria as well. So you've got lactobacillus, which is a specific strain. You can get specific supplements which are specific bacterial strains. So you can go into so much detail depending upon what your makeup is, and what you're struggling with at the moment, and what makes you, what makes your neurobiology you, and then you can really target that. Because if your gut is out of balance and you're not producing certain neurotransmitters such as GABA, which is really calming, and you can notice that through certain tests, or potentially dopamine as well, which is through a specific bacteria called Escherichia, you can really look at it. And also it's there to absorb all that food we've been consuming. So ultimately you can have the best diet in the world, but if the gut is in a space of kind of not being able to take that in, absorb it and use it, it's going to be a struggle. But there are ways in which, how do you then support a gut which is out of balance? But there are ways in which to do that through certain liposomal supplements, just to get that process going. The gut is just such a massive piece of the puzzle, which
you say it's the most important.
Yeah, I think it's one of the most important. I think gut health again has exploded over social media over the last number of years, rightfully so. I think it is a big part of the picture, because I suppose that is where we take in and absorb all of our foods.
Yeah, I was drawn to that quote because Tim Spector said you could replace SRIs with a really good probiotic, depending on the person.
Yeah.
Just for its properties in making you feel better and feel good about yourself. So
yeah,
it's really, really interesting.
And I think just quickly in terms of SSRIs, again, linked to depression. And again, there's so many comorbidities that aren't there in terms of ADHD and mental health. Like that's, I suppose, how I got into where I am now in terms of my understanding what I do, was probably through that mental health loop.
Yeah.
And just how debilitating you can feel through, I suppose, depression and anxiety. And yeah, I suppose on the one hand, like there is science out there, and there is an opinion in which that if you heal the gut, you can heal the gut's ability to produce serotonin, and therefore might not be so reliant on SSRIs. That is an argument. And in some cases, people, that does work. I think it's just, if it works for you, then great. But equally, let's not bash SSRIs, which can be a life thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, I think it's a really interesting discussion.
So it's not a guarantee, but it's worth a go.
For sure. Yeah, and it definitely works for some people, but equally, it might not be that, and we might need to look somewhere else, because the body is, yes, the gut's a part of it, but there are so many other parts of it.
Yeah. A really quick shout out to our sponsor, Proven Vitamins. Not only do they make this podcast possible, but they make vitamins that actually taste incredible, which makes keeping on top of them so much easier. I love this brand because they're high quality, honest, affordable, and even more affordable now because you can get 30% off with the code ADHD30. Now, back to the episode. So yeast overgrowth, you've spoken about Candida. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Candida in the gut, intensifying ADHD symptoms. What exactly is that, and does it affect adults too?
Yes, so Candida is a yeast. Now, within the gut, it's a organ which has lots of different microorganisms. So little small kind of, it has bacteria, it might have parasites, which shouldn't be really in there. And it also can have yeast. Now, Candida in the right amounts is useful, but it can overgrow and then start to produce neurotoxins, which can increase our inflammatory load. And obviously we know the gut and the brain is connected, and that can really cause agitation, emotional dysregulation. I really see this in, again, answering your question, it can happen in children, yes, and it can also happen in adults. So it's about looking at the amount of it. So if it is overgrown, it can disrupt those pathways which we looked at and discussed earlier. So I think it again is another piece of the puzzle, and I've helped many families and many children who, or both their children and or one, have got Candida overgrowth, and how you can help kind of reduce that back into, I suppose, normal levels can have a massive, massive effect, because it can amplify symptoms such as struggling to go to sleep, or being really hyperactive or really restless or very quick to rage is a massive one, just out of
Was
nowhere.
it?
Um, what causes it? So yeah, so it feeds off sugar. So if you're eating which is again is useful to know, but again, the reality is there's lots of, children and, like our safe foods, right? Adults like our safe foods, and some of them are highly processed, so how do you go about doing that? So again, it's about understanding, but it's not about saying, right, let's completely cut out sugar. That's such a hard thing to do, so I think it's about looking at what things can we add in, or what things can we swap, which I'm so cautious of in the advice I give, because particularly as we spoke about before, ADHD brains can be all or nothing. It's like, right, this is the plan. I need to cut out X, Y, and Z. It just doesn't. I never deliver plans like that, because it can just go the opposite way. Because again, you feel that shame, that guilt of not being able to. I wasn't able to do that. But actually, it's look at the level of the biology. Like, look what's going on deeper. I would say, what else can we add in?
Yeah.
Or when we are having sugar, what can we pair it with? So, for example, if we're having sugar, can we pair it with some protein? Can we pair it with some healthy fats? That will ultimately reduce, I suppose, it's one thing here in terms of the blood sugar spiking effect, which I know is talked about a lot, in lots of different ways. But if we're just purely looking at the effects of sugar, I think adding in protein and adding in fiber and adding in healthy fats can be a really useful way to help with that. It's sometimes maybe notice when that time is happening. So when are you grabbing for sugar? Is it a hunger, or is it that you're looking for a stimulation, and that therefore that's become a habit? That could be sugar is very highly addictive, and it gives that dopamine hit, right? And if sometimes we have a low dopamine profile, is that why we're going for that, for example? So I think
definitely the dopamine.
Yeah, and it's really, and it's just something to be aware of. But it's like, okay, can we say, I don't know, can we this week, for example, look to still maybe have that stack, but equally, what can we add in with that? So it's just the first step of just, I suppose, recognizing it. And again, these things take time. I think it's just, but it's very much not like some people can tolerate, and that's what they want. They'll be like, well, I want what's the best option here? And I'll be like, I want to cut it out, and I'll explore that with them if they want to do that. That's fine. But ultimately, I think looking at a scale of good, better, best is just really useful. Like, what's your good look like, and let's just keep it like that.
What are people looking for? How do you spot it?
Yeah. So I would, in terms of, I mean, it could be many different things going on, but specifically in terms of that overgrowth, in terms of that candida, I would really look for, particularly within children, how quick they are to get to rage. Now, that could be children. Yeah, that could be, yeah, exactly. That could be children just being children, for sure. But I would look at it over a long period of time and look at it in different environments. And ultimately, a parent is they are the expert on their child. Like, yes, I'm here to support, but ultimately, exactly what is happening at certain times, at school or coming back home or whatever it might be. And I'd really look for, that real quick to rage where it might just come out of nowhere. That usually is kind of a real sort of tell sign of that candida overgrowth. That is all sort of, I suppose that will be all tied in terms of, obviously it's at the level of the gut, and people can present as that, but stomach pain could be lots of different things. I mean, so could rage to a certain extent, but that one tends to be, really linked.
It's a bit of a buzzword at the moment, protein, in the ADHD world. And I know it helps with your medication if you're on medication, but I've heard as well that people with ADHD need more protein than neurotypicals. Is that true?
So, yeah, I mean, if we looked at it in terms of a structural point of view, in terms of we need protein is made up of amino acids, right? And those amino acids combine together to make, if we look at those neurotransmitters such as tyrosine, etc. Now, so they're really important for the structural making of those neurotransmitters. It's also really useful in terms of helping stabilize that blood sugar, because protein releases energy slower than, say, pure sugar, if you like. So that can be really useful, and particularly that can really help with sometimes with emotional dysregulation for children as well, and adults, is when we get really hungry. It might just be that we haven't eaten or we've forgotten to eat. So particularly for adults, having like a set time to eat can be really useful in terms of that, and making sure it's paired. So like protein, a healthy fat is really useful, and some complex carbs can be absolutely really, really useful. But I think also the other side to the protein argument, because it's got a lot of awareness at the moment, is fiber. Like, we don't eat enough many people don't eat enough fiber. You need a minimum of 30 grams a day. Many of us are just about hitting 20. But ultimately, fiber is feeding the probiotics, so the good bacteria in our digestive system. So the more range of different fibrous foods we're eating, in terms of the different colors, they're going to give different polyphenols, which are going to feed the range of bacteria to produce those things which we want, such as those vitamins and minerals, such as those enzymes, such as those neurotransmitters within our digestive system. So fiber is one, I think, which goes missing a lot. And as we've talked about, the importance of a balanced digestive system and that gut microbiome together. So yes, protein is important, but there are also a lot of other things important. I think it's just about trying to just be aware of it and having, a balance, because sometimes there might be a week where you're like, oh, I haven't eaten any fiber this week. But I think it's just about recognizing it and thinking, okay, how can I just pair certain foods together? And that's not necessarily making like a meal, because that's another conversation in itself, like having, the mental capacity to make a meal and all of the just different steps. So I'm very cautious, as well as being like, right, here's 10 different meals. They're going to take you 45 minutes to make. It's like, no, here are 5 meals. They have 5 ingredients. They're going to take you 10 minutes to make, And what does a meal look like? It could just be like a selection of 5 different pieces of food you put together, and that's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
Like,
So how do you, I was thinking this, how do you pair sugar with protein if you're just having a snack?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mean, with sugar, so sugar can be like, I suppose we look at sugar in terms of like complex carb is a sugar,
So I'm
But
thinking
if you're
chocolate.
okay, yeah. So I mean, you could have chocolate, you could have a little bit of apple, and you could have some peanut butter on there, for example, and that combination, that combination there, you've got some sugar, you've got some protein, and you've got some healthy fat, for example. So I think it's just about finding those combinations. And again, it's not about like, oh, I'm having sugar, I need to have protein, or always combine it. I think it's just having a bit like a more of an awareness, or it's like, right, this is my favorite snack. Can I make it? Could I make myself an energy ball, which could be 3 or 4 ingredients in a blender? Again, I know it is making it, but there are also other snacks you can literally buy off the shelf, which might be a little bit more nutritionally dense for you as well. But then equally, eating something is better than not eating anything at all. So it's really meeting where somebody's at, and not really not putting any shame at all around food whatsoever is really important.
What was a game changer for me? Frozen chopped garlic, frozen chopped onions, and frozen chopped ginger. Because I used to hate doing all of those things, and it used to put me off like cooking a whole meal, and just having those in the freezer ready to whack out. Like, I love it. And there's and protein bread as well, which I know you could probably get some dodgy ones, but there's some out there which is just bread and loads of seeds and nuts in it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's perfect if you're just rushing to work in the morning.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
out there, ADHD friendly things, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just about recognizing what is out there. And again, you could have that seed bread topped with, if you are loving your Nutella at the moment, you could put that on there instead of putting it on white bread, for example, and that would be a really good start. So it's just about those small little swaps, all over looking at those small little things, which is really important. And I also love the fact, like, the frozen pre-chopped veg or whatever it might be is an absolute game changer.
What are the most common nutritional deficiencies you see in ADHD children?
Yeah, there are 3 really. I'd say omega-3, zinc, and magnesium. Now, omega-3 is a fatty acid. We need it. It's essential, and it does come from oily fish. However, children sometimes don't usually eat a whole lot of oily fish, particularly neurodiverse children, because of the sense, the taste, the texture, and we'll go into that in a bit more detail, I'm sure, later. So you can get it in terms of a supplement form. This would be a really good supplement as well to look to introduce. Now, the reason why is because it contains something called DHA, which is really important for that developmental side of the brain, particularly the prefrontal cortex, particularly within children. And it's just really important for emotional regulation, really important for memory, mood, all of those things which are kind of really important. So it's as a child, but equally as an adult, omega-3 is really important for downgrading inflammation. So, and usually, I suppose the patterns I've seen is that lots of people who come to me are really inflamed. Their nervous systems are on fire. Their body is literally on fire. And we want to try and put out that fire in the most sort of sustainable, non-sort of alarming way. And omega-3 can be really incredibly useful for that. I'd say the other one would be
It's so interesting, because I'm pretty sure that my body was stuck in fight or flight my whole life because of the ADHD, and I used to get ill all the time. Like, I think I was just always inflamed.
Mm.
Yeah, it's so important. What about if
Oh,
you're vegetarian
mm.
or vegan?
Yeah, vegan and vegetarian, you can get pure source from algae. So yeah, you can get it from non-fish sources. So there are, yeah, it's a really good question.
And that's with the
With all,
DHA as well.
yeah, with all of these, you can get the makeup might be slightly different, but you can get through, yeah, going through the source, I suppose, as opposed to like what are the fish eating, what you can go to the source itself can be really useful. Yeah,
And
obviously,
how
if
about
you're,
magnesium? Because there's so many different types of magnesium out there
yeah,
and
yeah,
different ways
yeah,
to
exactly.
take
Yeah,
it as
yeah, yeah,
well.
absolutely. Yeah,
Salts,
yeah, yeah. Different way.
cream.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And again, like it can be so overwhelming in terms of, oh wow, there are like many different types of magnesium. So yeah, I think it's firstly it's important like understanding what magnesium is for. So magnesium is really important for regulating the nervous system, particularly for obviously producing that dopamine we talked about before, but equally looking at it has a calming effect on the body's ability to produce GABA. So GABA sort of comes about in a cycle towards late afternoon of the day for that sort of real calming feeling, almost getting ready, I suppose, for that
Yeah.
end of the day sort of feeling. So it's
Favorite
really
time of the
important. And if, yeah, exactly, yeah. And if our bodies are really inflamed, I mean, the body's ability to make GABA is really important. And if you're kind of really inflamed as well, you're going to be stripping away magnesium. So even more important to have that magnesium to make that GABA,
day.
right? So,
Really? That's
yeah.
so interesting.
So
So
there,
would you
yeah,
say, like for a woman, for example, around that time of the month, because I know
yeah.
my inflammation goes really high, take more magnesium?
I mean, it depends how much you're taking already, but like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, to a certain extent, yes. Like there are some supplements which you want to be careful with, but there are equally some in terms magnesium where you can be still want to be careful. But yeah, around certain, yeah, exactly. And particularly also if you're doing lots of sport as well, because magnesium is really important for muscle relaxant. So you can find like signs of low magnesium could be sleep problems. It could be sensory issues with the environment, and equally it's muscle tension, or twitches, for example. You can really notice if there's low magnesium because you'll burn through your magnesium extremely quickly if you feel stressed, anxious, feel like you've got a lot on. And it's a real telltale sign of maybe not having enough. So yeah, magnesium is incredibly important. And in terms of how you can administer it as well, like yes, you can get the creams, the oils. You can get it in terms of Epsom salts, which sometimes is my go-to, just because you just feel like you just get into that bath if you've got a bath. And some people don't want a bath, and that's absolutely fine. It's like everybody's preference. So yeah, magnesium is incredibly useful. And I always said the last one I suppose was zinc. And again, zinc's really good for the immune system, which is incredibly important, and it can be really good in terms of helping that dopamine reuptake cycle. And equally, it's really important in terms of overall gut health. And how would you know you're low in zinc? So all of these things, I suppose, are if you're feeling certain traits and you want to look at them, that's really useful. But having certain ideas about what does low zinc look like? So that could look at particularly picky eating, for example, or selective eating is probably a better term. Frequent illness, slow wound healing, and looking at white spots on the nails, that could be a sign of low zinc. So there are signs to these things, and I usually do see them in terms of when I go through a client case history and ask certain questions about the whole body. Yeah, these things tend to come up, and they can make a real difference putting in a couple of supplements at the start.
So it's a bit of a minefield, isn't it, at the moment? Like there's so many supplements and everything out there. Would you say those three are the core ones for ADHD?
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. But again, you might have someone saying, something, that's helped them. But I would say, like from my personal experience and the science and the data I've seen, I say those three are really useful as a starting point. But again, like a good multivitamin, you could probably get those in there as well. You'll be covering those bases. But I think it really depends upon what you're experiencing and what areas you want to work on, really. And again, in terms of the types, yeah, magnesium, like you want to be careful because there are some which can be a little bit more disruptive to the gut. So it depends what the situation is like in the gut. But I'd say like magnesium bisglycinate is usually a really nice calming one.
And it's the glycinate that's better for sleep.
Glycinate or bisglycinate, yeah, very useful for sleep and calming the body.
So many kids obviously are extremely selective eaters. I love that term. How can parents improve nutrition without creating battles at the dinner table?
Yeah, I suppose it's one of the questions I get asked the most, because it's all very well, isn't it, having all this information and saying, yeah, but will my child, or it could be an adult, it could be a parent saying, I'm also supporting.
I know a lot of adults have it too.
Yeah, exactly. Like these are my safe foods. This is what works for me. And again, absolutely, fine. Let's meet you where you're at. If those are your safe foods, and that's the situation that keeps you going, let's start slow. So particularly with, I suppose, if we look at children, I suppose like more pressure equals high anxiety, which can equal, I suppose, avoidance and kind of disengagement. So the thing with that would be to, how can we lower the pressure? How can we lower pressure around food? Because many children just feel so overwhelmed, and that causes our nervous system to ramp up, and that causes, inflammation. So it's like this vicious cycle. So I suppose with anything, it's like, how can we lower the pressure? How can we calm our nervous system? Ultimately, it's just such a good, I suppose, mechanism anyway for ADHD in general. So I suppose lower the pressure, reduce the overwhelm, and that could be looking at kind of, yes, have their safe foods, but adding in maybe one or two other foods which they might be interested in. If they don't eat them, fine, but they're there, they're seeing them, they're on the table. Reduce that pressure. And again, it might not even be eating at the table. Usually people are really open to it, but sometimes it's like, oh, well, we need to have dinner all together. Okay, yes, that could be a goal you do want to achieve. And yeah, there's so many benefits to that, of course. But ultimately, what we're looking at right now, we're looking at increasing the diversity of foods. Does that look like if they're sitting on the carpet in front of the TV, eating some other foods you haven't seen before? Is that better than trying to force pressure and eating them at the table?
I used to hate sitting at dinner table because I've got sensory issues, even like the clinking of the plate and things like that.
Exactly.
Like it's
exactly.
yeah,
Or hearing other people chewing, and all of those things are really,
yes.
or
Oh my God.
or like forcing a conversation, like your child, you've had to sit through school all day, you've been masking just to survive that, and then you've come home and you've got to sit at the table.
Yeah, and then talk about your whole day and like.
Exactly. And I think also eating or having food available before they become hungry is so important, because usually when hunger kicks in, it's very hard to then come back to that, regulate it. It makes regulation a lot harder. So again, reduce pressure.
Like, their emotions, or because they just
want
what they want.
Yeah. So know your, like, I suppose, like when your child is going to be really hungry, and have something available before, like, hey, like if it's an after school pickup, having some their favorite food there at that time can be so useful. It can potentially save a meltdown.
That's a really good tip for adults as well, because if I wait till I'm really, really hungry, like I just want the quickest thing there. Like I don't want to faffing about in the kitchen cooking. And a lot of the times, like we're all guilty for ADHDs, but we'll put off eating and it gets to like 9 o'clock and you're just like, oh God, I can't be able to get everything out now. I'll have 8 rice cakes.
Absolutely. Or having those rescue meals, like those bits in the freezer you can literally chuck together.
Meals. Oh my God, I love that. Yeah, that's such a good hack.
Yeah, exactly. And equally, I suppose with children, it's about like drip feeding information, saying like, oh, sometimes I feel better when I'm eating, some fruits and vegetables, and just leaving like that. So it's not like, why are you not eating your vegetables? Like, it's like, oh, I feel better when I'm eating that. Or yeah, some of these foods really help when I've got a tummy ache. That little drip feed can be really useful, and you don't need a response. It just helps in terms of, that's a really low sort of pressure approach, which can be really useful, not just for children, but equally for adults.
Yeah, definitely. What's been some of your biggest breakthroughs with your clients?
Going from a place of like emotional exhaustion, anger, overwhelm, to just feeling heard, right? Really feeling heard for the first time, and working with someone for, my program is a minimum of 12 weeks. So, and there's a reason for that. It's because change doesn't happen overnight. It does take time. And to really hear that person, really hear their story, really hear what they're going through. In terms of breakthroughs, I've had, children who have really struggled to sleep, who have, not been able to sleep for years, who've been able to sleep, or children who have gone from like extreme rage to kind of reducing in terms of their meltdowns. Children who have really struggled, I don't know, school's a completely different conversation, who have really struggled to go to school because they're like kind of low mood, self-confidence, go to school again. And equally adults as well, who have really struggled with addiction.
I love how you've shaped that with compassion, because I think so many kids are labelled like a burden or so annoying, like he never eats his dinner, and it's almost like they're the bad kid, where actually they're coming from a place of struggle, not trying to be more worse.
Yeah, absolutely. Your child is not being a problem, they are having a problem. Like, how can we help them meet them where they're at, and how can we help them regulate? It's just ultimately so important.
What would be your advice to parents whose child has just had an ADHD diagnosis and they're not sure what to do next?
Start small, because there can be so much overwhelming amount of information out there. So I think give your time to process what's happened. You might have been on this journey for a long time. It might be something which has come on quite sudden. Regardless of whatever your situation is, have that time to process what has happened. And you might think, oh, it's not, I knew this was the case, but still take that time to process that, whatever that looks like and what that looks like for you.
So it
And
can
then
be
I
just
think
as hard as on the parents, can't it?
yeah, because there can be like, I suppose a lot of like misunderstanding about, oh, is it the way I've done this or X, Y, and Z? It's just like, well, no, it's a neurodevelopmental condition. Like have the compassion, have the space and see what, you know, then once you've kind of, I suppose, feel comfortable and got the space and process a lot of emotions, whether it's for your child and or yourself, because it can be incredibly, like we spoke about before, in terms of relating to grief, then see, okay, what are the areas in which I can, if it's for your child, start to notice more things, having an understanding of what works for them, ask the questions and staying curious is really useful. Try and look for neuroaffirming practitioners, whether it could be in nutrition, that might be in therapy, that might be in, PT, for example. Really look for that because that can make a massive difference to your experience with that support.
So what programs are you offering right now for parents of ADHD and their kids?
I have a 12-week program and it uses my brain body methods, which again, yeah, really kind of ties in everything we've discussed really. So it looks at nutrition. So it looks at specific food supplements and potential lab testing, if that's appropriate, which again, in some cases can be really useful. And then it looks at lifestyle. So it looks at sleep, movement, and how we can optimize environments, particularly looking at what's your sensory environment like? Are you sensory seeking or kind of, don't want that sort of sensory load? Then equally it looks at a mindset piece, which really looks at shifts in terms of lowering the pressure. Because all like the nutrition and the lifestyle is incredibly important, but how it's delivered is equally as important. Yeah, it's a 12-week journey. We'd start by having an initial consultation to really hear your voice, like really hear your journey. We'd take the time to hear all of that, which is just so important because so many people just do not feel heard.
So just a few quick fire questions to finish off. What's one current narrative you'd like to interrupt?
ADHD is not a behavioral problem. It's not being too much. It's not being not enough. It's a neurobiological, neurodevelopmental way of thinking, of being, which has so many different multifaceted approaches to it, which I think need to be looked at as a whole. Yes, medication is an option. So is nutrition, so is lifestyle, so is environment, so is mindset, so is nervous system regulation. Like combining those pieces together is when you have such a profound effect. Just like ecosystems need like biodiversity to thrive, our society needs different ways of thinking, of creating, of problem solving. But I think ultimately right now, and it is getting better, but it's still taking so much time. There's a society based upon certain principles, norms, and rules, which ultimately fit a certain type of brain. But at the moment, in some environments, don't cater for all different types of brains. But I feel like the movement's getting stronger and stronger, and people are sharing our voices, like yourself and so many other people right now, which is incredibly important.
Give us one nutrition myth about ADHD you would love to retire forever.
That there's no sort of like one food or one diet or one supplement or one hack that is the thing. It's a combination of different things that, and again, there might be a supplement or group of supplements which works really well for you, and that's you swear by that, and that's great. Like you found something which is going to help you amongst other things.
How does someone kind of hack their way to good health? Like if they don't have access to these tests and
sure.
things,
Yeah, it's a really good
how can
question.
they start simply?
I'd say again, like with any of these things, start slow. I think the first thing would just be to try and add some more fiber into your diet. And again, this is a very general term because that might not be useful for somebody based upon their previous medical history. But if we're talking generally, I would say increase the diversity of fiber within the diet for sure. In terms of try to go for like, start off with eating 3 more vegetables you haven't had in a week, and can those 3 things be different colors? And that would be your starting point. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. The diversity of, so like saying to somebody, right, I think we need to get 30 different plants a week. Okay. Yes, is doable if you know a lot about it, but that is so overwhelming to start off. That's why I'm saying work with someone who's neuroaffirming. Like that just usually, unless they've got the capacity and really want to go for it and want all the data and the information. But I'd say 9 times out of 10, it's right. Start slow. Like, yes, increasing your plant diversity, whether that's spices, fruit, vegetables, etc. Herbs can be really useful, but let's start really slow and let's start off with 5, and with children as well, you can get them involved in terms of like having a color chart, and there's loads of different ways, and adults as well. But I think, just start slow.
So one hopeful thing that you would want parents listening today to take away?
I think, feeling empowered to actually ask the questions. and question people. Like, what's their advice? What's their background? Are they neuroaffirming? Like, look at all these things, look at things deeper, because yeah, you are ultimately in control. Like, you are advocating for yourself, and particularly, if you got a child as well, for your child or children, is just so unbelievably important. And asking the question, like, what does my child need right now to feel supported and regulated, is just really important. And starting to noticing those things and seeing it through a lens of lowering that pressure, and ultimately to know that you're doing your best.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for coming on today.
No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you
I
so
could
much
ask
for
you
having me
so
on.
many more questions.
Yeah.
You're incredible. You're so knowledgeable. So, so good. Where can people find you online?
So I'm at Well Martin Nutrition on Instagram, and I've got a website as well, wellmartinnutrition.com. And if people want more sort of targeted advice, I offer a free 30-minute consultation. So yeah, just drop me a DM on Instagram, or you can book via my website, and we can start a conversation.
Yeah, and I'll leave all Will's links and stuff in the caption.